In its cover story this week, Finweek gives entrepreneurs the lowdown on how to get their product into corporate supply chains while also looking at the pitfalls to avoid. Joining us now, we have Advocate Thayn Niemand from Galileo Capital and Deon Oberholzer, MD of Veri-Com. Gentlemen, thank you so much for making the time. Let me first come to you first, Deon, and also why is it so difficult for small businesses to crack it into the big supply chains of big corporates?
I think when people hire, I think the problem is that it's a new world, and a lot of people don't understand how big corporates think and how they apply their decision-making process. And it's like you're trying to stand there and catch candy falling over a fence, and people say that there's a handout that's going to come your way. Actually, it's not like that. You got to really go and push and dig yourself into there. And people don't know how to do that. So I think it's understanding how to go about getting people to notice you, which is the biggest challenge.
Deon, I think one of the things that I often notice when you talk to entrepreneurs is they look at a corporate and they just see there's millions of rands, there's millions of rands of marketing money, there's millions of rands in widgets, there's millions of rands in catering, supplies, etc. They see it as simply an opportunity to cash in. But reality is corporates are quite mercenary when it comes to dealing with business. They run to they often have financial managers, CFOs, etc., that are running these businesses down to the wire in terms of margins. When you look at when you're a small business and you look at a corporate, how should you be approaching that relationship?
I think, Mark, the biggest challenge is this is not, if you look at it, for example, from a marketing perspective, this is not a shotgun approach. It's a sniper approach. You got to understand why they need your product. You've got to understand why your product is better. You've got to understand why your service is better. You've got to understand why they'll be better off buying from you. And you've got to believe in it yourself. Otherwise, they won't. If you're not convinced that you have the best product in your particular category, or at least understand what they are buying and how much they pay for it, and where they're buying it from at the moment, and why they are happy with what they get and why they are not happy, you're a babe in the woods. You stand there saying, you know what, maybe if I stand here long enough, I'll get to have a fried chicken fly into my face.
Okay, but then I'll throw that to Thayn, because one of the issues is enterprise development, and it's one of my real bugbears is that people see, well, we'll establish a small business and it will simply cash in off a corporate supply chain. But they don't have that, they don't have the wherewithal to be able to actually deal with the corporate, they don't have the scale, etc. Enterprise development, the reason I get unhappy with it is that it is often just seen as we'll create a little business that's going to cash in on a supply chain and doesn't fulfill an actual role. I mean, what's your take on that?
You know, Mark, there are two issues around this, and unfortunately sometimes the small business needs to start with the second issue rather than the first issue. The first issue is you've got to prove to the corporate, as Deon says, that you're capable of doing this development, you're capable of making a contribution. But are they capable? So it's not only about getting into the supply chain, that's very difficult, but it's actually proving to yourself that you've got the capabilities from a financial perspective, from an operational perspective, from an administrative perspective, and even from a logistic perspective. Can you actually do the job if you get given this tender, or if you get given this job to do for this big corporate?
Let's look at how this is possibly a game changer once the small business actually makes it into the supply chain. How does it change the game completely from your perspective then?
As a small business owner that has been involved with a corporate, what I find is that it's not a guaranteed ticket going forward. You are almost on a continual basis applying for a job. You know, so don't think once you've got the first job, you've made it. You actually have to continue, and do not rely on getting the corporate work all the time. So what I like to look at it is there's a production line going. You need to do the small work to pay for the water and lights, the bread and the salaries, and when you get the big corporate job, then that's when the cherry comes. But you have to keep working at it.
Thayn, how do you prevent overreaching in that situation? So you get the corporate job, suddenly it takes up all your capacity. You don't want to have all your eggs in one basket. How do you prevent that from happening? Do you have to immediately start growing your business to have extra capacity to take on smaller jobs as well?
It sounds very cliche, but I think you need to do a business plan for that job. You've got to understand you're going to get paid after 60 days. I know there's some corporates that will pay you on 30 days, and they've made that policy decision. But actually, cash flow could be a huge problem. So ideally, you would like to read the contract, understand the cash flow implications, and then go back and see whether you can cope with the cash flow, whether you can cope with the legal issues, because remember, it's not only your reputation's at risk here, it's the corporate's reputation that's at risk, as well as the procurement managers at risk.
Right.
So I think analyze.
Let me come back to the argument that I often hear that small and medium-sized enterprises, especially black businesses, is always in the periphery. It's always catering. It's always the small services. At what point is a small business really ready to say that I want to be at the epicenter of the business model and really delivering on key business principles?
I think it's a very good question. I think, and I almost want to start from another angle, saying that one of the things with entrepreneurship is that patience is a virtue, in the sense that sometimes doing the small stuff for many customers is actually the big stuff. and you don't necessarily have to get the grandest contracts to make a good living. You can get small business. I think it's more important that you do that one thing that you do extremely well, and make sure that that customer will give you glowing references when you want to add more to it. Because if he can trust you with a small contract, he's more likely to trust you with a larger contract. And other people are more likely to trust you with small contracts and then with larger contracts. I think if you expect to walk in, like there's this mentality with tenderpreneurs where you just get this multi-million rand tender and then you're rich. Excuse me, get a small one, deliver successfully. Get a slightly bigger one, deliver successfully. Otherwise you have a short story to tell about when you almost were rich and then you went out of business.
Yeah. I quickly want to look in, before Mark, you come in, at the BEE codes and whether, these are an enabler for small businesses to get into the corporate supply chains of the big guys.
Obviously, the answer is depending on whether you're black or not.
Right.
Because if you're a black entrepreneur, what the new codes do is they actually focus enterprise development towards supply chain. So what government has done with the codes that has just come out on the 11th of October is saying, guys, we know that you are spending millions of rands. We want you to spend it on the small black entrepreneur. And what we want you to do is we want to take your enterprise development budget that you have, for which you get points in the codes, and invest it over there so that your supply chain can develop. So it's actually a perfect storm in that opportunity. Where the problem comes in is these people don't know of each other. There's a small black entrepreneur, and I mentored 19 from them from Soweto. They don't know how to get to the big corporates. And the big corporates are saying, no small black companies are offering me this product. And there's this chasm, and people don't know how to build bridges. And I think that's the problem.
Isn't that an issue across the board, though? For a small business to get into a bigger supply chain? Surely that's not only true for BEE entrepreneurs.
It's not. It's not. I think the benefit that the black entrepreneurs are getting now is there's now a mechanism on the corporate side that says I can get a benefit to find you.
Right.
That has not necessarily been the case in the past, and that's quite important.
One of the things you touched on there was just using payment terms as the example, but should the entrepreneur push back when they're dealing with the corporate? Because I think that often they just accept the terms that get given to them and say, you will deliver X, this is what we'll pay, how we'll pay you, this is what your deliverables are, and they just say, yes, thank you very much. But the entrepreneur can actually push back, rather deliver on what you can deliver rather than overpromise.
You've touched on a fantastic point there, Mark, because we as entrepreneurs, especially the small business entrepreneurs, will always think we've got to be cheapest so that we can get the job.
Right.
And it's about the value you offer. So I think you've got to be very careful of accepting the first price you get from the big corporate, because we don't have the economies of scale that the big corporates have. So again, I go back to the fundamentals. If you have your financial acumen in place, you can say, well, can I do it for that price? Is it worth my while to do it? Because at the end of the day, I'd rather have no deal than a bad deal. So yes, I think the corporates are also very aware of this. And you need to price to your market. So if I'm dealing with the black entrepreneur in Soweto and I'm dealing with the consultant in Sandton, there's got to be some sort of difference because of the value that I offer.
Let's talk about the small businesses on the sideline, because you flailing their arms in the air and saying, look at me, I'm right here. What should they be doing in a practical sense to make themselves more attractive to the big guys?
Now, Zipper, network. But be careful of networking yourself out of business, because a lot of us like to network so much that we don't make money in the side, So you need to network. Go onto the search engines, search the companies, have a look where your niche is, read books, get the financial statements of the companies that you'd like to deal with. Facebook, Twitter, all these are wonderful methods in where you can glean information and then focus your proposal, not like a shotgun approach as Deon was talking about earlier, but a sniper approach. So there's a lot we can do.
Thayn, you wrote something in the article that really struck me, maybe because we work in communications and it's something that we take for granted, but you said that a lot of businesses don't have the basics in place. They've got spelling mistakes, they don't have websites, they don't have business cards. Is it worth it for a small business before you target a corporate to get a professional in to do that sort of thing for you?
I don't think you have to. You know, for example, I'm not a social media fundi, but I just went onto the web. I then found 5 domains that I liked, and I bought them for 625 Rand. So rather than have Thayn@gmail.com,
Right.
I have Thayn@finman.co.za, which gives you that better perception, that better appreciation that, well, this is not just a small guy there. So the perception, Krista, is so important, and it's with modern technology of the Microsoft Office software, you can create yourself a wonderful letterhead instead of going to go and buy this off the shelf stationery. So there's a lot we can do.
Deon, I want to jump in here, and one of the things that I've kind of picked up over the last couple of years is that we're often in a hurry to start businesses. We're often in our 20s, we have no professional network to speak of. We then want to go and supply into Tiger Brands, we want to supply into S.A.A., but we have no network to speak of, we have no foot in the door. How valuable is age and actual experience in industry that you want to supply into before suddenly jumping in and saying, I'm now going to supply a corporate?
I think Mark, you raised an incredibly important point. I always advise young people that before you start a business in an industry, have 5 to 10 years working experience in that industry. If you want to supply a product to a large transport company, have worked there. I mean, know the people from the inside. And then from that knowledge, why would you learn at your own expense? Because you will hit the deck. It is what happens. Now, it's much easier to learn at a big corporate's expense, get into their training programs, what they geared for that. And especially if you're a black executive wanting to get ahead in life. Don't try to wake up one morning and say, I'm an entrepreneur, somebody's going to give me a contract and I'll be okay. Start on the process of saying, I want to specialize in a particular industry. Now you need to know that industry. The best way to do it, get a job. Get a job in that industry. One of the things that really worry me about some of our, I would call it emerging enterprises, they're really subsistence enterprises, and the moment somebody offers them a job, they'll take it. So they're not in business because they're entrepreneurs. They're in business because they can't find a job. Then they give up, and now they try to make a living. To get into big corporate supply chain is to get into that job first, because now you know everybody, and you can build those relationships.
Do you want to add something there?
I'd love to, if I may. The problem is getting that job, Deon. You know, there's so much unemployment out there, and we do have accidental entrepreneurs, as I like to call them. But the other issue is, what about mentorships? We have such a shortage of mentorships, and I've had 1 or 2 people this year come to me and say, I'll work for you for free, I just need that work experience. So if you can't get the job, try and offer your services, but mentorship is so vital.
But is there not there's an issue there, and that a lot of entrepreneurs want to be one-man bands. They want to be one-man rock stars because they see what they see the newspapers, see the magazines, they see the TV shows that have so-and-so made it. It doesn't say anything about so-and-so's team that made it. It was the individual. And I think that, I see a lot of the entrepreneurs that come through Finweek and that kind of thing, and there's very much the idea that it's a one-person success story, whereas the bigger, more established businesses, you'll talk to a lot of the CEOs and they say, we made it because I had 5 or 6 good people around me.
There's a wonderful tweet that I read this last week, and it says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go as a team. And I think that's exactly
I want to put the elephant in the room on the table, if I may, before we go. And this is just the amount of corruption that actually happens along the supply chain. I mean, how relevant and effective are company databases? And I'm looking at government in particular, because entrepreneur needs to get onto the database, and then from the database, that's where you probably have an opportunity. But it's all about who you know in order to get to that database. Let me throw that at you, Deon. I mean, are these platforms working?
Naziba, let me say the following. If you're a young entrepreneur and you want to get into business, my advice to you is avoid government to start with. rather find out in the rough and tumble of the private world how these things work. Because if you look at government, they often take 6 months to pay. They have processes. I mean, I had a claim from a university the other day where when they were 3 months late, they said, oh, I need a tax clearance certificate. They didn't ask me before the time. Another month is lost. Now, if you're on critical cash flow, you cannot afford that. So my advice is avoid government tenders. Get into business. And then when you're established, then go into government tenders.
I think there's a fine line there because I mean, Thayn, as you mentioned, you need a network, and people are encouraged to use their networks to get ahead in business. Yeah. So where is the line between getting
networking and corruption?
Yeah, networking and corruption. It's a very fine line there.